And coming on the show, we have Ram V and Sumit Kumar to talk about their new Vault comic series, These Savage Shores, out in comic book stores everywhere on October 3rd. Guys, thanks for coming on the show.
Pleasure to be here.
Third time's the charm, right? So, with this series, we're seeing kind of this pre-colonial version of India before it's really even India, and we're seeing this kind of like European old world horror, kind of coming to the region, to the continent, and finding that there's something that region has its own kind of dark and sinister secrets. Even older than the stuff that's going on in Europe. How did this story kind of like all, gestate for you, Ram and Sumit? Because I know, like, Ram, a lot of your stuff takes place, even, your DC stuff takes place in the heart of the city. What made you want to kind of take things a little more rural?
I don't necessarily base my stories particularly in metropolitan zones. It just so happened that that's the choice I seem to make for all the previous work that I've done. With this, I think it was just, for me, it was a merging or meshing of two ideas. I know at some point I was investigating the Rakshas mythology in India, which is very, very oddly similar to the vampire myth, but predates the vampire myth by about 2, maybe 3 centuries, and so I found that to be very interesting. And then on a separate occasion, I was watching a sort of period drama set in 1800s in the UK, and the two ideas just seemed to connect in my head at that point. And so I went, oh yeah, there's a story here. There's a story to be told. And then obviously there was the thematic sort of juxtaposition of the advent of colonialism and the approach of this vampire from old world Europe, and so it all just seemed to fit, like most of my story ideas do.
And with me, I just like the idea, honestly. I don't think any story set in this era or period has been done in comics yet. Has it been?
Certainly.
No, I don't think so. I think we're doing the first pre-colonial India setting story.
Yeah, so it was pretty interesting to create a story set in that time. And since I always wanted to draw a story set in that period, it was pretty exciting. So when Ram told me the idea, I was on board.
Well, and I had heard, there are certainly horror undertones throughout the series, but I remember, talking to you guys in the past, you had mentioned that for both of you don't really see These Savage Shores so much as an overt horror. It more is kind of it's kind of like it'll inform it a bit, but it's almost like it's more kind of a commentary and meditation on the effects of imperialism and European colonialism.
Yeah, I don't think it's as sort of direct as that. I don't like to put the metaphor before the story, if you will.
Sure.
But it's certainly not horror. If at all I were to attempt at describing the genre, I'd probably say it's a dark gothic tragedy more than anything. And so there are definitely overtones of gothic romance. There are overtones of supernatural events, and most importantly, there are definitely bits that are just old history and so historical fiction, if you will. There are certainly horror bits. I mean, there are vampires, there's monsters, and there's stuff going on with that, but none of it is. I don't think the motivations of the story are the same as the motivations of the horror genre, if you will. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. There's those tropes and those elements, but there is, you had mentioned story before metaphor. It's also story before genre in this case, absolutely, right?
Yeah. I mean, and I've if anything, I've been consistent in doing that with all of my works before. Like, the first thing I did was Black Mamba, which was I mean, if you look at it, it looks like it's crime noir, but set in Mumbai. But there is no real crime in that story. So technically, even there, I'm probably putting the story before the genre, if you will.
Right. I mean, you see it in Paradiso too, right? It's not quite, it's a post-apocalyptic story in as much as a inciting incident happened, but but there is still, like, civilization still exists, cities still exist.
Right.
But, we were talking vampires, both the current arc of Paradiso and, of course, just These Savage Shores from Jump involve vampires.
Yeah. It's just one of those things. I was having this discussion actually with Dan Waters, who's writing Lucifer at Vertigo, and we were talking about how there was a time where you could read episodic comics, and you had writers doing more than one issue every month, and you could read those issues across characters, across franchises, if you will, and get a sense of what the writer was thinking about in that month, if you will. And so perhaps at the same time as I've been writing These Savage Shores and Paradiso, I've been thinking about vampires. And I mean, on a deeper level, I suppose I'm thinking about people who don't fit in, which is the overtone in Paradiso. And certainly that idea of people not understanding where they come from or where each other come from is certainly an overtone that you will see in These Savage Shores as well.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of influences, you had mentioned you had certainly had vampires on the brain and outsider fiction or outsider characters on the brain. I guess, like, because you're about to do, not to like toot your horn too loud, you're about to do a Batman story who is like the most outsider of the Justice League, or the biggest outsider of the Justice League.
Right.
What would you say some of your more specific influences? And this goes to you too, Sumit. Certainly visually. Like, what would you say some of your influences are in kind of crafting this story?
Firstly, there are artists like Bernie Wrightson that I really love when it comes to horror. Yeah, so and I generally love noir films and just the black and white quality of it. So my inspiration was not from not exclusively from comics. It was from movies, games, and different mediums. So,
yeah, as it should be, I think. It always serves a medium better when you are drawing from other places and so trying to do new things within that medium.
So I think every horror movie I've seen has somehow made its way to this.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
At my end, I think I am generally drawn to almost all fiction presenting outsider characters. I just find it a fascinating place to be, to feel like you're part of something and yet be able to look at it from a point of view that isn't necessarily placed within that thing, if you will. And so Batman certainly is a very forceful example of that. Certainly someone who doesn't belong as a superhero or his more sort of socially acceptable avatar, if you will. So neither Bruce Wayne doesn't belong in his world, and Batman doesn't belong in his world either. So it's always a case of being an outsider. With These Savage Shores, I think that's certainly the case. But we're talking about coming to society, and if you're an outsider, you have two options. Either you're fascinated by the place that you are in, and you find it beautiful and alluring, and you want to know everything about it, or as an outsider, you can come to a place and the first thing you do is judge it and decide how you want to change it to suit what your worldview is. And that really is a subject that lies at the core of colonialism and imperialism, if you will. And so those bits were certainly influential in taking the outsider view for these savage shores. As far as influences go, obvious influences being, Bram Stoker, Lovecraft. Both of them, I think, feature certainly heavily in the writing style and the art style, the narrative style, if you will, of the book. But apart from that, I just like all good Gothic fiction, so I'm sure there are many, many influences, even if they're not very direct.
Right, in a lot of ways, it kind of like, it feels, certainly the opening in Europe feels like a Hammer horror movie, right? Like a Christopher Lee Dracula.
Right.
Which is, top notch. But the,
yeah, I mean, I find that, especially if I'm going to take a genre that is as well known and well sort of delved into as the vampire myth, I don't see any point in sort of trying to reinvent it or trying to portray it with any kind of, as Kieran Gillen put it in his quote, postmodern whimsy. I would rather take that trope, play it straight, but use it in a more interesting way to tell a story that has almost nothing to do with that trope, if you will.
Sure, yeah. I mean, in a lot of ways, like, this story, it's really kind of, from what I know of Indian culture, which is admittedly not as much as I should, but this kind of period marks like an end of innocence for the entire region as they have these foreign incursions into what will become India.
I mean, that's a very romantic narrative. I wouldn't call it an end of innocence. I don't think that region of the world was an innocent place to begin with. It was certainly a place full of strife and conflict, and people were constantly trying to gain control over each other's territories. But innocent or not, it was its own place. It was breeding its own culture. It was contributing to the world something that was uniquely its own. And what colonialism does is it strips away everything that is unique. It strips away your identity, and it seeks to turn you into the most sort of mediocre, replicable, resource-generating society or construct there is. And so, if anything, I'm decrying the loss of all the things that place could have become, rather than becoming what was essentially a resource-generating construct for the British Empire.
Right. Kind of the stunted potential.
Yeah.
You and you guys had worked together before, albeit on a much different project. What made, I guess this is kind of a twofold question. What made this book the right project to team up on again, and what made Vault the right publisher to bring this instead of, say, Image or any of the other guys?
Yeah, Sumit, do you want to take that one first, or?
I think it would be better if you answer first, because the choice of publisher and all that.
Okay. To be honest, from my point of view, all projects are good projects to work with Sumit on. He is just incredibly talented and a brilliant artist. In fact, the very first comic that I pitched, which was Brigands to Action Lab, I originally intended to work on it with Sumit, and the only reason we didn't is because Sumit said he was focusing on his education at the time. And so as soon as he was in a position where he could come back and go, okay, I'm ready to take up comic book work, we found a project to work on. As soon as that project drew close to its end, I knew that I had to do another project with Sumit, or he would have a bajillion other writers knocking down his doors, trying to get him to work with them. As far as submitting to Vault, I'm still doing parodies at Image. So I was in the process of writing parodies at Image, and as a relatively new creator to the industry, I mean, I've been around for 2 years now, or a little bit more than 2 years, really. And so, as a relative newcomer, I didn't think I had the currency to have multiple creator-owned things running at the same time. So, to be honest, I didn't know if we were ready to pitch this. But at the time, I had started talking to Adrian, and Adrian had seen some of my work on Paradiso. Adrian's the editor involved, of course. And he invited a pitch, and I said, you know what, okay, I have this idea, I wanted to work on it. I didn't know if we were going to be ready to do it just yet, but I said, okay, let me send this pitch and see what Adrian has to say. So I sent him a one-pager, and I think about an hour after I sent it, he wrote back going, this is the best pitch I've seen in a while, definitely want you to do this, so when can we get started? And at that point, I think that was the first time, I'd mentioned the idea to Sumit before, but I think that was the first time I went back and said, Sumit, we kind of do need to start working on this soon. So the pitch kind of happened because I was invited to pitch. It wasn't that I was intending to go out and look to do creator-owned projects just yet, because I was quite overwhelmed with the amount of work that Paradiso needed at the time. I mean, of course, I'm a bit more comfortable with that process now, but really it was just someone going, you should pitch to us, and me going, actually, you're right, here's a pitch, see what you have to say. Great, when do we do the book?
Yeah. With me, I just liked the stories that Ram was doing. So, like I said, this story is pretty unique. The story in this setting has not been done before. So, that was the factor that was decisive for me. And I really liked this idea. So, yeah, we agreed to work on this. That's it.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
it's kind of refreshing when you come across people that it doesn't take a lot. Hey man, I had this idea. Cool, I like this idea. Let's do it.
Yeah, it didn't take that long actually. I just read the synopsis that Ram sent, and I really liked it. I think that this should be done. So, yeah, I really liked it.
The, for our listeners at home that maybe aren't in the know, we had John Layman on at the beginning of the month, and he's about to launch Outer Darkness over with Skybound, and he had written basically outlined the entire series before Chew ended. Chew ended almost 2 years ago. It's not normally that easy for stuff to move forward. But this is it's a region of the world that's rarely explored in Western comics. It's a time period in said region that's never explored in Western comics. You're kind of defying genre. You're defying, there is underlying commentary without it being it's not a heavy-handed book at all. There is, there's kind of this, it's almost more, it's this region that predates what Kipling portrayed. It's something, because, honestly, I had no idea about, about horror elements within Indian folklore before reading this book and doing my research for this book, right?
Right.
So I think, and I, have come to found that everybody identifies Indian cinema with Bollywood, but there is an entire subgenre of Indian horror out there too.
Oh yeah. And which is quite famous, in as much as people pastiche the sort of 80s era of Hollywood with its synthesizer sounds and hyper saturated colors, the Indian B movie genre is in itself an aesthetic that deserves that kind of recognition and that kind of homage. I know pretty much everyone around my age group who lived in India when I did, kind of grew up watching those movies and looking and ogling those posters that would show up outside of, building walls and going, that one, yeah. And these movies had like the most ridiculous titles too, so it's certainly a genre that's influential. Yeah,
the Rapsi brothers movie.
Yeah.
Really. Which literally translates to an old mention.
I need to get this in my life right now. So, without giving the game away, where can we expect, as the Europeans and the European vampires come to India? I can only assume that things escalate on both sides. Is there anything you can kind of tease where the story goes next without, huge spoilers?
I think what it essentially comes down to is a conflict of viewpoints. That's where it's going to go. So what I can tease is if you can think about the difference in the way a vampire looks at humanity and, say, a potential godlike creature looks at humanity. And I guess that argument then translates to everything we've been saying about imperialism and colonialism as well. And so at least thematically, that's where it's going. In terms of the actual story, it spans everything from war to vampire hunting to shape-shifting demons to the first Anglo-Mysorean conflict. So the scope of it is quite grand in that sense. Even though we skip time between issues in the story, it spans quite a large scope, if you will. So there's quite a bit of grand imagery to come, but in a sense, the story is about a conflict of viewpoints.
Well, I have to ask our signature question before I return you guys to your respective homes in England and India.
Mm-hmm.
What are you guys currently geeking out over?
Last time we talked, I was geeking out over James Gurney, but this week it's, I don't know whether I'm pronouncing it right or not. It's Julian Totino Tedesco.
Oh yeah, he's amazing.
Yeah, and I just read one of his interviews where he explains his work process, and it was quite unusual. He mixes these traditional and digital media together, and so yeah, that's what I'm geeking about currently, and trying it out myself as to how I can incorporate it into my work.
Nice. Yeah. So I should expect to see that in the next pages then. As far as me, I just came back from Thought Bubble. So if at all there's a thing to geek out about, it is the fact that I had a chance to meet Warren Ellis, who's been an absolute hero as far as comics writing is concerned. Had a chance to grab a drink and a chat with him at Thought Bubble, so that was pretty immense. And we launched a new book, Gravity's Wall. The response to that has been great. So I've just come back on the back end of a weekend that was spent entirely with comics people. So been geeking out about all things comics there. And then apart from that, at home, I've downloaded the latest Spider-Man game, which I promised myself I wouldn't do, but I did it anyway. And it might sound bizarre, but really I don't care about playing the game. All I want to do is swing about New York.
Just all these people, help Spider-Man, I'm getting mugged, and you're just like, nah, man.
No, man, did you see that somersault? That was great. Showboating as people cry out for help.
Yeah.
No, so I've been enjoying that, and I will be in New York in 2 days' time. So it's it's bizarrely cool to go. Oh yeah, I'm gonna be there in a couple of days while you're swinging past in the game. Yeah.
I will be there in 4 days, so I will see you there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, looking forward to it, man.
Yeah, I was talking to Ryan about it. Are the White Noise guys? Are you going to have your own Artist Alley table down there?
No, I don't have a table this year because they didn't get one. But Ryan does, and so I think Ryan and Casper both have tables, so they will be there. And then and then Dan, Alex, and myself will just kind of be floating around.
Okay. Well, yeah. So again, These Savage Shores, October 3rd, Comixology, comic book stores everywhere. Ram, Sumit, thanks for coming on the show.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having us, man.
Yeah. Thanks, man.